Welcome back, everyone, to the No BS Real Estate Podcast, your listening how-to guide to the Australian property and finance market. I'm your host, Jo, and on today's show, we have Adrian from Cerulean Legal, and I'm so excited to have you here, Adrian. This conversation about conveyancing, especially when it comes to buying your home. I feel like there is so much to unpack, and I know we don't have a lot today, but I think we're going to get through a fair bit. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, Jo. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. And like I said to you earlier, Adrian, the way I like to run these sessions is without, hammering you too much about questions back and forth, but I like to get started straight into the episode with the questions. So my first question to you is, how did you decide that you wanted to become a conveyancer, and what motivates you to help people navigate the legal complexities of property transactions?
Yeah, so pursuing legal studies and perhaps in this case, me becoming a lawyer has always been
Mm.
sort of my passion and ambition to start off with. Now, in saying that, perhaps like most of this motivation or part of this motivation is also the fact that my uncle is
Mm.
a lawyer. So
Oh,
I am in this space in property law. So, although my practice involve other areas of laws as well, but property law is my main area of focus, and conveyancing can be counted as my true passion. Now,
right.
in terms of conveyancing, it can be a very straightforward process, though eventually each matter will have its own unique challenges.
Of course.
Now, I find that it's incredibly rewarding when I help my clients navigate through these challenges and complexities involving all these conveyancing transactions in place.
Of
So
course.
ultimately, really my goal is to, make sure that my client is supported and comfortable throughout the process of conveyancing from one end to the other end.
Nice. And you're so right in saying it's that comfortable, right? Because it's not every day that, home buyers deal with property lawyers or conveyancers, right? Then you're not buying property every day. So unless you're, investing
Yeah.
regularly, it can be very overwhelming to understand exactly what the role of a conveyancer does and how they help you. So I would love to get into, I guess, specifically with your service. You mentioned property law conveyancing. Is there a difference with the two?
Mm, Technically, no, but property law involves more about, other areas as well. For example, there can be subdivision,
Mhm.
um, caveats, covenant, removal of covenants. There can be litigation involved as well. So hence, conveyancing technically is an area in the property law, mainly to do with transfers of property for sales and purchases.
Right. So no, that's interesting. I just wanted to clear that because I get that question a fair bit saying, oh, well, do I get a property lawyer or do I get a conveyancer? And I'm like, look, both are dealing in the same wheelhouse, but slightly varied. So I'm glad you cleared that up.
Oh, good. Thanks for
And
that, Joe.
of course, and with you specifically in your services, walk me through, I guess, the process. Like if I'm a home buyer, I wanted to come to you today, I need a conveyancer. Well, I have this question's twofold, right? The first question is, when is the best time for a home buyer to engage a property lawyer or conveyancer when they're buying a property?
I would say technically from the get-go, because once you've started looking for a property, mainly I would suggest that, clients when they look at a particular property that they wanted to buy or
Hmm.
wanted to know more about the property, the first thing that they would usually have or be provided with would be the contract of sale and also the section 32,
Yeah.
or what's called the vendor statement. Now, although looking for a property and making sure that property is within the budget is usually what people think about first,
Hmm.
the next, probably the more crucial one, would be getting a contract review
Yeah.
of, the property that you wanted to buy. Mainly is to ensure that, mm, there's no surprises after buying the
Hmm.
property. For example, if, you're buying a piece of land to build on, as a very straightforward example, and the client wanted to build a three-story house. As opposed at settlement itself, they wouldn't want to know at settlement that they can't build a three-story house because there is a height restriction. So
Yes, of
there
course.
will be things, there will be all these restrictions or zoning in place that may actually make the property or actually turn out that the property is not something desirable for a particular person.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because I feel like there's an often with home buying, this is just for anyone listening in general, when you're going through this process, I often see buyers, they'll engage a conveyancer too late. So you'll already put in an offer, you'll win the property, and then you get a conveyancer. And that's not often the right step because once you've committed to that purchase, there's only so much like conveyancing and property lawyers can do because you've purchased technically, right? So there's not much that can be done to, if there is a covenant, if there is a caveat or a restriction on the land, or maybe there's some really hairy vendor, conditions like that you've just signed and committed to. So it's so crucial. What Adrian's saying is to get in first. And that's often where I know some conveyancers do free Section 32 reviews. Is that something that you offer, or that, you do reviews for these Section 32s when they're going through the properties?
Yes, I do it as part of my conveyancing service. I review the contract and Section 32 before advising the client about, any ins and outs of the property, what is disclosed in the Section 32, making sure that, the client understand what's involved before, the client make that commitment to sign off their lives.
Yeah, and I guess this would be really, if you're thinking of buying at auction, definitely have your review done before you go to auction. By someone, by one of the conveyancers or property lawyers. I think that's paramount because auction is even more demanding. It is a purchase. If you win, you've won the whole lot. No take backs.
It is. It's an unconditional contract for an auction versus if it's a private offer, you could have made the contract subject to, for example, pest and building inspections or even
Yes.
finance. But an auction, once you've signed it, it's an unconditional contract from the get-go.
That's right. No, that's really interesting because it leads me into another question is often what comes into a negotiation with, purchasing is people know that you can negotiate the price, right? So they'll offer one price, but they don't often know that they can also negotiate the terms on a contract to either sometimes make it more attractive, but also to protect yourself for that purchase. So like you just mentioned, subject to, building and pest inspection, there's specific wording. So is there anything that you see as more common outside of building and pest inspection clauses, Adrian, that, people should be protecting themselves for specifically, or not really?
There are some other clauses that can be relevant. For example, cleaning of the property. Some clients may be particular, or some buyers may want the property to be professionally cleaned before settlement. Hence, that can be made part of the terms of the contract as well.
Yeah.
And especially with buying existing property, some buyers may be particular about, goods, for example, appliances that are part of the property to make sure that they are in good working order. So
Yes.
that can also be built into the contract as well. And if you're buying land, some contracts can be made subject to successful or suitable soil tests.
Oh, right.
So that way, you can make sure that the correct foundation can be laid on the land, or if the land is suitable or not for a particular construction. So yeah, those are a few examples that I've seen and I've dealt with as well.
No, that's really good. I really like that overview because often, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And this is why coming to, a professional for that assistance, like I'm assuming that's what you would guide them through when they come to you with a Section 32 if they want to offer. And they do want to make that, investment, you would advise on those types of clauses, I'd assume. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Perfect. This is just for our listeners to know that you don't have to remember all of this. This is why you talk to a professional so they can guide you. And I guess going back to the services question, what's the typical process that a home buyer follows? So if they do come to you at that time, like we've been talking about, they're about to offer on a property, maybe they get the Section 32 reviewed. What are the steps to get them to settlement? What typically happens?
So after after the review of the contract, and if the client is happy to proceed with the purchase, normally in Victoria, contracts will be signed with the agent directly. If there's any negotiations that would have been done as part of the contract review itself before signing, once the contract is signed, normally I'll guide the clients through the process of settlement that involves things like, getting appropriate forms and letters signed, completing particular forms with the State Revenue Office, preparation of the statement of adjustments, attending to any pre-settlement inspections. That's usually done, usually within 7 days before the settlement itself. And
Nice.
after pre-settlement inspection is done, and if client is happy to go ahead with the settlement, there's no issues with the property. Then settlement nowadays are completed electronically through a platform called PEXA. So what really happens on settlement day is that payments to the vendor for stamp duty, for registration fees, all of those will be made electronically. And at the same time of payment, the legal title of the property will be transferred to the buyer's name.
Right.
So yeah, pretty much that's what happens. And what I do once settlement's completed, I normally give the client a call, and also email the client to inform them that settlement's completed. They can now go and arrange to collect the keys from the agent.
Right. So that's the exciting part. You get to deliver the good news.
Yes, that is right.
I think that's no that and it seems like you kind of take on the brunt of the hard work in that sense. Like the customer doesn't need to feel too stressed about preparing too much. So
Yeah. Yeah, so what I do is normally I'll inform the client at every juncture of the transaction itself,
yeah.
making sure that the client is also on board of what's happening before settlement itself, so that there's no surprises at all.
No, that's really good. And I think that's so important as well. And my one of my other questions I wanted to kind of ask, I guess, is have you got any experience that you can recall where, you've had to do, I guess, a transaction or maybe when you're going back and forth in negotiations? So I find the negotiation component very interesting with property law in particular, because when a client is offering on a property, often they put their best foot forward. So if they've had their Section 32 review, they have all the subject to clauses that you've mentioned. Sometimes vendors don't accept those clauses, right? So they come back and they say, no, I'm not going to accept, I'm not going to clean the house. And no, I'm not going to make sure that it's in good working order, right? How does the role of a conveyancer come into play here? So what do you typically do, or can you recall a situation where you've had to represent your client when that's happened?
Now, when that's happened, it depends on really the client, how much the client wants the property. Because if the vendor doesn't agree to any of these conditions to be included, that may mean that, the vendor may have other buyers line up who may be able to provide a better offer or a more attractive offer to the vendor. Now, in that case, unfortunately, as a buyer, there's not much choices. It's pretty much just to weigh out whether the property is something that you like, or whether you can, do, for example, a peasant building inspection before you even sign the contract, as an example. And you go and test out all the appliances and goods, making sure that, they are to your satisfaction before settlement itself. So those are the few things that you can probably get it done first before you sign the contract, if it's due wanting to purchase the property. Otherwise, you may have to choose whether to proceed or, look for something else that's better.
And would you say that sometimes, like with those clauses, they can be negotiated on? Like, would you would you ever try go back and forth with the vendor, or would you mainly just accept the terms are, if they're not accepting building and pest, for example, then it's, the advice you just mentioned?
Mainly, it's a straightforward process. Rarely there's going to be back and forth on terms that you've requested, unless there's anything else that you would bring to the table. For example, if you're increasing the price, or if there's any changes in the client's offer to purchase the property, then it can go back and forth, but rarely it goes to that extent. Normally,
Right.
it's just a straightforward asking that question, whether the vendor agrees, and if the vendor says no, then consider something else, or
Yeah.
look for something else. That's normally the process. Rarely you have to go the roundabout.
But no, that's really positive to hear, I think, just because often you don't know. You deal with it every day, right? So this is something you see, and the fact that you're saying it's not overly common, it's more straightforward, I think is very reassuring, for a lot of people, because the last thing you want to do in purchasing is go into a battle of back and forth. But you also want to make sure you're protected, of course. So it's a fine line. And I guess, Adrian, one of my last questions here is, there's obviously so much to keep up to date with the property markets, and different markets changing. How do you stay on top of the latest, property law changes? Because I know Victoria in particular, the legislation hasn't changed much officially, but how do you stay on top of, all the things that are coming in now with, any legal changes and things like that? How do you keep up?
Well, keeping myself abreast to any updates is really crucial, because making sure that makes sure that my client is provided with the best possible advice when it is needed. Normally, I attend to things like seminars, webinars, and workshops that are focused on property law. That gives me, whatever updates that's necessary in terms of what's evolved, or what's happening. Apart from that, there are valuable resources that's coming from the Law Institute of Victoria as well. They also provide seminars and webinars, and I am a member of the Law Institute of Victoria. Other than that, really, it's just utilizing whatever that's online, the online database, and I also subscribe to publications where I can read up on articles or case studies on any changes to the law. But yeah, that's normally in terms of what I do. And usually what happens is that I also go out for networking, where I, maintain relationship with other legal professionals. Normally we'll exchange, our experience and insights and discussions about, any updates to the law. That way, we can all keep ourselves updated.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because I always think, oh my gosh, the legal side, I haven't got a legal brain, you can probably tell. So I'm always thinking of how do you keep up, with all the the updates. But it's interesting to know, that there's obviously a process and something you do to keep up to date, because I can imagine it would be very, very heavy in some areas, especially property law in some cases.
Yes. Well, we as lawyers, we needed to do our CPD, what's called continuing professional development as well. So that's part of our studies. Every year we needed to maintain at least 10 points. So there's no escape through that.
So you've kept accountable with CPD. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize. There you go. Well, Adrian, it's been so good to chat to you. My final question to you is just for those listeners who are tuning in at the moment, who, are either about to start home buying, or maybe they're, going to an inspection this week. What's your advice to those people on the market who are looking, from your perspective? Any advice you've got to them?
I would say getting the contract reviewed first would be my best advice, and it's a must. If you're looking for the property, if you're going to the auction, you're going to the inspection, get the contract, get the Section 32, get it reviewed before you, make any choices.
No, that's very solid advice. It's one of our biggest financial investments we make in our lifetime. So at the end of the day, getting that checked, it's paramount. So I think that's really solid advice. I've loved having a chat to you, Adrian. You've answered so many of my burning questions. Hopefully I've done the same for the listeners who have had the same ones. These are some of these questions have come from an open forum where I've asked, buyers, have you got questions for conveyancers? Open slather, what would you ask? And you've done a really good job at, answering those questions and reassuring, I think, a lot of people on what to expect in the journey. So thank you so much again for being here.
Likewise, thank you as well, Joe.
Of course. Well, wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's in the Abodey app or perhaps you're listening in on Spotify, thank you so much for tuning in. We've loved having you. If you want to catch up on this episode, tune into Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're hanging out in Abodey, enjoy, good luck, all the best, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being here.